The casket was sealed shut. But the dog wouldn't stop barking. It wasn't a whimper, it wasn't grief, it was a warning. A German shepherd, worn but watchful, had been silent all morning, until the moment the honor guards began lowering the flag-draped casket into the ground. Now his body was rigid, his ears perked forward, his bark echoed through the cemetery like a signal flare. Short, sharp, repeating, targeted. A trembling hand tried to pull him back on the leash. "It's okay. Maverick, he's gone." But Maverick refused to move. His claws scraped against the stone path as he lunged forward, not toward the casket, but toward the priest. The bark turned into a growl. The leash strained. The priest froze mid-prayer, eyes widening as the dog locked onto him with alarming focus. Mourners gasped. Soldiers tensed. A Marine sergeant stepped in, Maverick, heel. But the K9 wasn't listening, not to the handler, not to anyone. He growled again, low, guttural, primal. And then his bark shifted into something stranger. Repeating. Paused. Again, 1 bark, 2, 1, 3, 1, 1. Someone whispered, "Wait, that's a pattern." A young boy near the front blinked, pale. "Morse code. He's spelling something." A woman dropped her purse. Silence washed over the graveyard. B-A-D, the... Dog barked again, M-A-N. Now all eyes snapped toward the priest. The man who was about to close the ceremony for Sergeant Joel Matheson, a decorated war veteran, recently deceased after a peaceful final week in hospice. The dog stepped forward, growling, barking again. B-A-D-M-A-N-L-I-E, the soldier. Closest to Maverick turned. Are we saying he's trying to tell us something? And just like that, a funeral turned into an investigation. But what no one knew, what no one even suspected, was that Joel Matheson hadn't died naturally, and his K9 partner. He wasn't just mourning. He was the only witness to a cover-up, Joy. Tear-stained voice whispered, "Did Maverick just accuse the priest?" The chaplain's face was stone cold. Too cold. Then he ran. 3 weeks earlier, Joel Matheson couldn't feel the left side of his body. Not from combat, not from injury, just time. Time had stolen the strength from his legs, rusted his spine, and caved in his once proud shoulders. The man who'd stormed compounds and walked through enemy fire with nothing but grit and a growl was now trapped inside a VA hospice bed, hooked to wires, whispering only to one soul, Maverick, his partner. His shadow. His only family left. They'd been inseparable for 11 years. Not just through deployments, but through after. The part no one talked about. PTSD. Cold sweats. Guilt that clawed at your brain. Nights where you woke up swinging at ghosts. Only Maverick. Understood. When the tremors began, Joel didn't tell anyone. He'd been through worse. But when the blackout started, he knew something was off. Not just illness, not just age. Someone had been visiting him late at night, slipping into the room after the nurses had gone. At first, he thought it was hospice. Protocol. Then one night Maverick lunged at the visitor. The man in the white coat had dropped the syringe, vanished before security arrived. The hospital told Joel he must have imagined it, that the stress and meds were playing tricks, that he'd been alone, but Joel remembered the scent, the cologne, and Maverick hadn't barked in 4 years. Until that night. Since then, Joel wrote down everything he remembered, slid the notes under Maverick's bed in a small metal tin, marked only by a scratched-in word, truth. He didn't trust anyone. Not the nurses, not the doctors, and especially not the chaplain who kept checking in after hours. There was only one thing Joel wanted before he died, one last request. "Let Maverick stay with me," he'd whispered to his nurse. "Don't separate us, not for 1 second. He's got something to tell." The nurse nodded. But that night Maverick was taken to the kennel. The next morning Joel was dead. No autopsy, no questions. Just a closed casket and a hurried funeral. But something had changed in Maverick. The moment he was led back to the hospital room, he didn't go to the bed, he went to the oxygen tank. Sniffed once. Barked. Then he stared at the chaplain's coat draped over the chair. He didn't growl. He remembered. And now, standing before that very same man, on the day of Joel's burial, Maverick knew exactly what he was doing. He wasn't just a grieving dog. He was the only witness, and Joel had trained him to do more than obey commands. He'd trained him to deliver messages from the grave. They didn't believe the dog at first. The funeral was paused. People murmured, unsure if they'd just witnessed a dog acting out, or something far more chilling. 2 honor guards had restrained Maverick after the priest bolted. He didn't bite, he didn't resist. But his eyes never left the horizon, where the priest vanished behind headstones and vanished into the woods. It was the boy, Benji, the sergeant's nephew, who made the first move. "He was spelling," Benji said again, clinging to his notepad. "I promise I was learning Morse last week. He said bad man lie." The adults exchanged glances. No one wanted to say it. That maybe the priest wasn't who he said he was. But one man broke the silence. Chief Donovan, Joel's old squadmate. Grey-bearded, scar running down his cheek. Our man who didn't speak unless something needed to be done. He stepped forward, his voice like gravel. "Open the casket." The funeral director shook his head. I'm sorry, sir, but that goes against the family's—" "I am the family," gasps. People shifted. A woman near the front clutched her chest. The director hesitated, then nodded. The screws were loosened. The flag was folded back, and what they saw inside was not Joel Matheson. Not the way he should have looked. His face was swollen, purple, his lips blistered, his eyes slightly open, bloodshot. This wasn't peaceful, this was suffocation, this was chemical. The crowd recoiled. Benji dropped his notebook. Donovan's voice cut through the wind. "Get the VA, get the police, get everyone." But Maverick was already pulling again, toward the woods, toward the man who ran 3 days earlier. Nurse Carla had been working the overnight shift at the VA center when she saw the flicker on the hallway camera. Room 42B, Joel Matheson's room, had a glitch, brief static, then darkness. When the feed returned, Joel was asleep. But something looked off. Maverick was gone. He always slept by the cot. Always. That night, the dog had been moved to the kennels per a late note signed by a Dr. Maynard, but Nurse Carla had never met anyone by that name. The next morning, Joel was gone. Cause of death, respiratory failure. No questions. No follow-ups except one. Why had Maverick been taken out of the room right before Joel died? Carla didn't have clearance to investigate, but she remembered something Joel told her once. "If they come for me, they'll try to silence him first." But Maverick remembers smells. He never forgets. She slipped into the back room, found Maverick's folder and tucked it into her bag. That was the day before the funeral. And now, watching everything unravel, she stepped forward. "I think I know who that priest is," she said. "And I don't think he's a priest at all." Chief Donovan held up the sealed envelope Joel had given him a week prior. He was instructed to open it only if something felt wrong at the funeral. He tore it open. Inside, a single message in Joel's scratchy handwriting. "If Maverick barks at the casket, do not trust the man who prays." Below it, a small code, M47, blue dot, Vault 2. Donovan blinked. He left a trail. He handed the note to Nurse Carla. "Could this be a reference to the old VA archives?" She nodded slowly. "Vault 2. That's off limits to most staff. I only saw it once. Security door. Leads to sealed patient files. And medical research records. And M47. Carla's face paled. "That's the trial number." Joel had volunteered for an experimental treatment after his diagnosis. "To help other vets," he said, "to give meaning to what's left." But he'd stopped going to the sessions 6 months ago. No one knew why. Now they did. That night, Donovan, Carla, and Maverick snuck into the VA archives using a stolen security badge. The hallways were cold, lights flickered, cameras suspiciously inactive. The vault door stood like a wall of silence, steel and shadows. Donovan entered the code. The vault hissed open. Inside, rows of metal drawers, each marked with patient codes, some long dead, others still active. They found M47, inside a vial, a syringe and a photo. Joel, sitting in a hospital room, hooked up to an IV, smiling at someone out of frame. Donovan turned it over. A name was scribbled in red pen. Father Maynard, Nurse Carla's. Knees buckled. "That's him, that's the priest." He said he was just offering Joel spiritual guidance. But he's the same man listed here as lead researcher. Lead researcher? Donovan squinted at the rest of the file. Maynard wasn't a chaplain. He was the pharmaceutical rep overseeing M47, the experimental sedation trial approved for palliative combat veterans. But it wasn't a treatment. It was a test of how long the body could withstand chemical suppression before full neurological collapse. Joel hadn't volunteered. He'd been marked, and Maynard had faked a chaplain's credentials to stay close to finish the trial. Carla whispered, "He used Joel as a human experiment." Maverick barked once, then turned, alert. Someone was outside the vault. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate. Donovan drew his sidearm. Carla held Maverick close. The door creaked. A man's voice slithered through the gap. "You should have stayed at the funeral, Maynard." But this time he wasn't in a priest's robe. He wore a lab coat and gloves. For a moment it looked like they'd cornered him. Maynard froze in the doorway, caught in the light of the overhead bulb, his face a strange hybrid of calm and calculation. Not fear, not guilt, control. He held up his hands. "No need for that, Chief. I don't want anyone hurt. Least of all the dog." Donovan didn't lower his gun. Carla stepped forward, voice trembling. "You lied to us. You murdered Joel." Maynard's eyes flicked to the folder in her hands. "You're misreading what happened. Sergeant Matheson was dying. His lungs were gone. M47 was designed to bring peace gently, painlessly, and it worked. He passed without suffering. You sedated him against his will. He signed the forms." "No, he didn't," Carla snapped. "He told me. They made him sign blank papers when he was barely conscious." Maynard smiled. "Slightly. Well, who are they going to believe? A disgruntled nurse or the man listed as his spiritual counselor?" He stepped inside. "Slow? Precise?" Maverick growled low. "You see," Maynard continued, "this entire facility was built on a quiet agreement. Vets die here. Nobody asks questions. It's cleaner that way. Efficient. No press, no mess. And if we happen to test certain compounds in the process—" He shrugged. Donovan's trigger finger twitched. "Why come to the funeral dressed as a priest?" he demanded. Maynard's expression didn't flinch. "Because I knew Joel had written something down, and I knew that dog would try to say something. I was there to make sure neither of them ruined what we worked for." His voice turned sharp. "But you just couldn't let it go, could you?" A subtle movement. His hand slipped behind his back. Donovan fired. Click. No bullet. The gun jammed. Carla screamed. Maynard lunged. But before he could reach Donovan, Maverick was airborne. The K9 hit Maynard mid-torso, teeth locked on his wrist. Maynard howled, crashing to the floor. His other hand flailed wildly, reaching for something. A needle, the same kind used on Joel. In the struggle, the needle slid across the floor, stopping right beside Carla's foot. She kicked it away. Donovan wrestled Maynard under control, pressing his knee into his back. Maverick stood between them, chest heaving, hackles raised. It was over, or so they thought. Police came. VA administration was called. Donovan handed over the files, the vial, the footage. Maynard was arrested on sight. Maverick was cleared as a hero, not just for his loyalty, but for helping uncover what would later be called the silent trial, a covert euthanasia program masked as compassionate research. Headlines exploded. Congress got involved. VA officials resigned. Records were audited. M47 was permanently banned. Joel Matheson was posthumously honored. His funeral, rescheduled and held a week later, was everything a soldier deserved. Flags, guns, taps. Real respect. Carla stood beside the casket, tears in her eyes while Maverick sat unmoving, his head bowed low. Donovan placed his old dog tag on the casket. "We did it, brother. You were right to trust him." Everything finally felt right. But as the crowd began to disperse and Carla reached for Maverick's leash, he didn't move, just sat, staring, past the casket, toward a man standing far in the back. Sunglasses, a small earpiece, a familiar stillness. Like Maynard, Carla looked to Donovan. "Do you recognize him?" Donovan squinted. "No, but Maverick does." The funeral service ended in a blur of emotion, but none of it mattered now. Maverick wouldn't move. Carla tried again, her voice shaky, but the dog remained still, eyes locked on the figure in the back. "That man, he's not one of ours, is he?" she whispered to Donovan, but the chief had no answer. He hadn't seen anyone like him before. The chill creeping over Carla wasn't just from the wind. She felt a weight like a heavy hand pressing on her chest, suffocating every breath. The calm she'd experienced just moments ago, the overwhelming sense of justice, of things being set right, was fading into something darker, something worse, something wasn't finished. "I'll handle it," Donovan muttered. But his voice didn't sound like the strong, commanding presence he was known for. There was something in his eyes, something distant, something broken. The last few days had been a whirlwind, the arrest, the headlines, the relief of finally knowing the truth about Maynard. Yet it all felt hollow. The weight of that hollow feeling settled deep in Donovan's gut. And even though the world thought the case had been closed, he couldn't shake the nagging sense that something had been overlooked. Something had slipped through the cracks. Carla knelt beside Maverick, brushing her fingers through his fur, but the dog's eyes never left the figure in the back. He growled softly, low, guttural, like a warning. "You're still watching, aren't you?" Carla murmured, her voice trembling. "You know something." The man in the back didn't move, he didn't flinch, he didn't even acknowledge them, just stood there, a silent sentinel. And something about the way he was watching, cold, calculating, chilled Carla to the bone. Donovan's voice broke through her thoughts. "We can't stay here, not with him still watching." But it was too late. The man had already made his move. Before Donovan could reach for his radio, a black SUV rolled up behind them. Two men in dark suits stepped out. They were clean, sharp. Like wolves in sheep's clothing, one of them was holding a familiar file. "Chief Donovan," the taller man said, his voice smooth. "I believe you have something that belongs to us." Carla stood up, her blood running cold. "What is this?" "This," the man said, his hand lifting the file, "is classified information. It's not yours. It never was." Donovan's pulse quickened. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't part of the resolution they had believed in. The SUV door opened again, and out stepped Father Maynard. But he wasn't the same man they'd seen before. This one was different. This one was wearing a pristine suit, and in his hand he held the same syringe, the same vial they had seen in the vault. Carla's breath caught. What the hell is going on here? Donovan's eyes widened as the reality hit him. Father Maynard wasn't just a man who'd manipulated the system. He wasn't just a pharmaceutical agent running illegal trials. He was an orchestrator, part of something much bigger, something that reached far beyond the VA and deep into shadowy corners that even Donovan couldn't see. The file, the syringe, the man in the back of the crowd. It was all connected, everything was connected, and it didn't matter what the world thought had been solved. It hadn't. Not by a long shot. Donovan turned to Carla, his face pale, haunted. "We've been played." Maverick's tail didn't wag. His ears pinned back, eyes locked on Maynard like he was staring down a ghost, because that's what Maynard had become now, not just a disgraced priest or a corrupt official. No, this was something deeper, darker, the kind of man who didn't act alone. He had backup. He had orders. The man in the black suit took a step forward. "I believe you're holding evidence tied to a federal program. That material is classified under Section 9. Donovan didn't move. He could hear his pulse pounding in his ears, feel the steel of his badge dig into his ribs. A badge that meant nothing here. These weren't officers. They weren't even government men. They were handlers, the kind of people who made sure things stayed buried. Carla instinctively shielded Maverick, who was growling louder now, louder than before, every muscle taut, his body trembling not in fear, but recognition. And then it hit her. "Wait," Carla said slowly. "You said this version of Maynard was different." Donovan blinked. "What?" "Look at his neck," she whispered. "No scar. The real Maynard had one. Remember? I saw it during the hospice visit. A long burn scar down his collar." Donovan narrowed his eyes. She was right. This man wasn't Maynard, it was a double, or worse. Maynard was never Maynard. Just a role, a face, an actor for a bigger operation. "You're not him," Carla said aloud. The man tilted his head, amused. "That's the trouble with perception, isn't it? You get attached to names, to labels. That's how people miss what's really happening." He stepped closer. "This isn't about Joel Matheson or a dog. This was never personal." Donovan clenched his fists. "The hell it wasn't. You euthanized a veteran without consent. You drugged him. You ran a trial on a dying man." "That's where you're wrong," the suit replied. "The trial wasn't on him. Everyone fell still." "What?" "It was on the dog." Silence dropped like a bomb. Carla looked at Maverick, then back at the man. "You're lying," but her voice cracked when she said it. "You think we put years of funding into a drug just to ease human suffering?" He laughed, cold and mechanical. "Joel was irrelevant. We needed to see how loyalty reacted under biochemical manipulation. Maverick was bonded to Joel at an abnormal level. The injections were tailored not to sedate Joel, but to induce a final emotional signal." Donovan stepped back, stunned. "The dog wasn't just responding emotionally," the man continued. "He was recording. The neural patterns in that dog's brain under stress are more precise than any surveillance tech we've built. And that moment, when Joel died and Maverick refused to leave, was the trigger. That was our data harvest." "You used him?" Carla gasped. "You programmed his grief." The man gave a soft shrug. "We enhanced what was already there. Loyalty, sorrow, guilt, all things dogs feel. We didn't create them. We just captured them." Maverick let out a guttural snarl that echoed through the cemetery. The suit turned to the agents. "Take the dog. We've got what we need." "No!" Carla rushed forward, but one of the agents pulled a baton, swinging it toward her. Crack, he didn't make it. Maverick moved first. Like a bullet of fur and fury, he slammed into the agent's legs, sending him crashing down. The second agent reached for a tranquilizer, but Donovan struck him with a shovel from a nearby gravesite, sending the dart flying into the grass. Maverick turned back toward the double, but the man didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't blink. He simply raised a tiny remote and clicked once. Beep! Maverick stopped mid-lunge, staggered, whined, then collapsed. No, no, no. Carla dropped to her knees beside him. Maverick? His body twitched, limp, eyes rolling, but he was still breathing. Donovan snatched the remote from the man's hand and crushed it under his boot. "You're not walking away from this." "You think this ends with me?" The man laughed. "This isn't a cover-up, Chief. It's a system. You've just tripped over the edge of something too big to stop. Sirens in the distance. Real ones. Uniforms. Police. Media. Too late for the imposter." He backed away, but Donovan was already dialing the state attorney. "Put him on every list," he growled. "And check dental. I want to know who the hell this man really is." The man in the suit gave one last smirk before cuffs closed around his wrists. "You're going to wish you never touched that dog." Donovan turned away. Carla was sobbing. And to Maverick's fur. He stirred weakly. She lifted his head, her tears falling on his muzzle. "I'm here," she whispered. "You stayed. I'm not leaving you." Maverick blinked slowly, then closed his eyes, peacefully this time, not in fear, but in rest. Donovan sat beside them, the weight of the truth pressing like a mountain on his back. Because they hadn't saved Maverick. Maverick had saved them. And somewhere buried deep in that dog's memory was a map of grief no machine could replicate, a map they tried to steal. But grief isn't programmable. And love, it fights back. 3 days later, Maverick's casket was lowered next to Joel's. No cameras, no speeches, just Carla, Donovan, a handful of veterans who hadn't spoken in years, and silence, the kind that carries ghosts. Donovan rested, Joel's badge on top of Maverick's flag. Carla placed a worn photo beside it. Joel and Maverick, both younger, both proud, standing under a banner that read, K9 Unit, Loyalty Beyond Life. The wind stirred, whispering through the headstones. Carla's hand trembled as she tucked something else into the coffin, a folded letter, Joel's last unsent message. She never opened it, she didn't have to, but the real ending came after the funeral that night back at headquarters. An officer dropped an envelope onto Donovan's desk. No return address. It was hand-delivered. Donovan frowned, opened it, and froze. Inside was a single photo, grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. It showed a large underground lab, rows of kennels, feed drips, dozens of dogs, some of them with burns, some missing ears, some with vacant, hollow eyes, and one in the center looked exactly like Maverick, only younger, wearing the same K9 tag, Unit 47. There was a second slip of paper beneath the photo, a single line typed in red ink. The one you buried wasn't the only one we trained. Donovan stood up so fast his chair toppled. He turned to the window and swore he saw something move in the shadows. 4 legs, silent, just beyond the gate, watching, waiting. And then it was gone. The months that followed were the kind that pass in slow motion, not the kind marked by days, but by echoes, by the quiet sound of claws that would never tap against hardwood again, by the rustle of wind that felt just a bit too familiar. By the empty seat in the truck, Maverick was gone, but his absence felt heavier than his presence ever did. Carla stayed in Joel's cabin, unsure whether it was grief or duty that rooted her there. She kept his boots by the door, Maverick's leash, still looped on the hook. Most days she sat on the porch steps with a cup of cold coffee, staring into the woods, waiting for a bark that would never come. Donovan came by often, more than he admitted to anyone else. He never stayed long. But each visit, he left something behind. A case file, a flash drive, a note scribbled in Joel's handwriting that he'd uncovered from the evidence room. All small pieces, all hints. None of them made sense alone, until they did. One note stood out, a hastily drawn diagram, circles, numbers, a series of dog tags. Joel had been tracking something. "They're making ghosts," it read. "Dogs trained to remember things we were supposed to forget." And slowly the pieces assembled into a chilling truth. Project Sentinel was real. It had existed for years, hidden under layers of unrelated defense contracts. It started as a psychological reinforcement tool, using dogs to stabilize PTSD responses. But somewhere along the line, it turned. They discovered that extreme emotional bonds, especially with terminal subjects, could induce biochemical reactions in the canine brain that acted like recording devices. Memories, not like human ones, but impressions, smells, emotions, and they were trying to extract them. Joel had been the last field test. Maverick had been the final key. But if what the envelope implied was true, Maverick wasn't the only one. Carla found herself walking the grounds late at night, unable to shake the feeling she was being watched. Sometimes she'd see something in the tree line, a pair of eyes, a silhouette. But every time she ran to check, there was nothing. Until one night there was. A shape limped into her headlights at the edge of the road, covered in mud, limping, ribs showing. A dog, not Maverick. Not exactly, but the same eyes, same hesitation, same weight of sorrow carried in its step. She brought him home, no collar, no chip, but a scar across his snout, like he'd worn something tight for a long time. When Donovan saw him, he didn't speak. Just knelt down and let the animal sniff his palm. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark, just rested his head in Donovan's lap. They named him Echo, because that's what he was, an echo of something they lost, or something they were meant to find. Weeks. Later, as Carla packed up Joel's belongings for the last time, she opened a box she'd avoided for months. Inside was Joel's service journal. Its last page had one sentence written shakily: "If love leaves a mark, maybe that's what saves us." She closed the book and looked down at Echo, asleep at her feet. Maybe Maverick was gone, but his memory, his love, was still here. In every bark that broke the silence, in every shadow that lingered just a moment longer, and in every heart that refused to forget. Do you think Maverick really died that day, or did a part of him live on in Echo?